Okay. Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Taghizadeh-Hesary. I'm from School of Global Studies of Tokai University in Japan. Welcome to the ESG Investment in East and Southeast Asia Conference, which is a joint conference by Tokai University, University of Kitakyushu, Oxford University, and World Scientific Publishers. So today we are honored to have speakers who are joining us here in Kitakyushu Convention Center and also online via Zoom. Thank you for joining us. So we are going to have several interesting presentations on ESG investment in East and Southeast Asia, and the implications are not only for this region but also for other regions and other countries. So with this background, let me invite our first speaker, Professor Saeko Urushibara, Vice President of the University of Kitakyushu, for kindly giving the welcoming remarks. Professor Urushibara, please.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much, Farhad, for your kind introduction. My name is Saeko Urushibara, and I am serving as a Vice President for Research and International Exchange at the University of Kitakyushu. It is my great honor to be invited to talk to you at the beginning of this conference. On behalf of the University of Kitakyushu, I would like to offer you our sincere welcome to the city of Kitakyushu and to this conference. With WHO lifting the state of emergency of COVID-19, it is my great pleasure to see so many participants from many areas of the globe and hold the conference in person as well as online. I am actually a theoretical linguist and have been working doing research within the framework of generative grammar, which is advocated by Noam Chomsky, an American linguist. Therefore, I am not so familiar with terminology in economics or finance, not to mention investment. However, as one of the world's citizens, I have a keen interest in guaranteeing economic developments in the developed and developing countries alike, ensuring environmental sustainability and social justice and human well-being. As you may know, the city of Kitakyushu was designated as one of the green growth model cities along with Paris, Stockholm, and Chicago in 2011. This made us the first green growth city in Asia and was an indication that many years of our long-lasting endeavors by the city and its citizens to overcome the notorious water and air pollution and to create environmentally and ecologically friendly schemes for energy and infrastructure. Thus, a group of researchers, including Professor Yoshiaki Uchifusa, who's there at our university, has been collaborating with researchers at Université de Paris, University of Stockholm, and University of Chicago for environmental researches. With these in mind, I regard this conference as a significant milestone to further promote such research by taking into consideration social responsibility and accountability of governments, private sectors, and individuals and citizens as investors. Needless to say, this viewpoint is particularly important for the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, proposed by the United Nations. Specifically, SDG 12 states the importance of ensuring sustainable consumption and production patterns. In my view, this is achieved by raising awareness and consciousness among governments, companies, and investors and stockholders. As many papers to be presented today address key environmental issues such as climate, water, as well as touching on social and human factors, including labor conditions, green investors, green bonds, and also greenwashing. I am sure there are going to be exchange of opinions from other SDGs like no poverty, which is #1, or clean water and sanitation, which is SDG 6, and affordable and clean energy, which is SDG 7, and so on. Therefore, I am really looking forward to your inspiring presentations, lively discussions, and above all, the overall success of this conference. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor Oroshibara, for the insightful, welcoming remarks. You highlighted very important points. Thank you very much. Next, I would like to invite Professor Naoto Yoshikawa, the Vice Chancellor of Tokai University and Chancellor of Hawaii Tokai International College, who is joining us from Honolulu. Professor Yoshikawa, please.
Thank you for my introductions. Good morning. And
just your mic is mute.
Oh.
Would you please unmute your mic?
It is. Can you hear me?
We cannot hear you.
It is on.
Yeah,
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah, we can hear. Sure.
Okay. Thank you. Good morning. However, here actually good afternoon, 3 o'clock afternoon. As a Tokai University Vice Chancellor, I welcome you to this hybrid conference on ESG investments in East and Southeast Asia. Professor Saiko Urushibara of the University of the Kitakyushu, Professor Troy Sternberg, University of Oxford, Professor Taghizadeh of Tokai University, distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends. Today's conference theme is Environmental, Social, and Governance ESG Investment, which has been one of the most important subjects of our globalized world. In 2006, Mr. Kofi Annan, UN Secretary General at that time, advocated that ESG should be the core of the principles for responsible investment, PRI, in the financial industry. Investors' priority and consideration are often the immediate economic returns benefit. In that sense, it is difficult for private investors to convince that ESG investments are the necessity for inclusive and sustainable economic growth. Investors need to pay attention to environmental and social values besides economic profit. Another problem is the need for a clear ESG definition and measurement indicators in investment in ESG. Private investors do not invest in ESG since it is difficult to see the investment's result without measurement. However, the ESG standard provides excellent guidelines for investors to ensure that the company or a project aligned with environmental and social values. The public sector is having a difficulty filling East and Southeast Asia's vast ESG investment gap. The private sector's limited ESG's interest is due to slow return and the above-mentioned problems. In order to overcome these investment gaps, the country's policies, including rules, regulations, and incentives, are needed to promote private investors in those projects to meet ESG goals with precise measurement. The ESG investments can contribute to reducing the carbon emission, preventing the deforestation, reducing waste and plastics, and reducing the dependency on the fossil fuels in line with the environmental aspect of the ESG. I believe ESG's investments as for social aspect can promote diversity, equity, anti-discrimination, cultural heritage protections, etc. Regarding a governance aspect, investors can promote risk mitigation, anti-corruption activities, leadership, and board independency of the companies. This conference is a joint event of the Tokai University, the University of the Kitakyushu, and the University of the Oxford. It brought together distinguished scholars to discuss ways to fill the financing gap of the ESG's related project in East and Southeast Asia and other developing regions to help achieve a sustainable and inclusive society. I am confident that today's conference will allow all participants to deepen their understanding of the ESG investments, encouraging everyone to lead in setting the tone for the research on ESG investments, which I believe will practically help to promote the ESG investment with the understanding of its necessity in many countries in East and Southeast Asia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Yoshikawa, for the opening remarks. You highlighted very important points and we appreciate it. So with these two interesting welcoming remarks and opening remarks, now we can start our conference. So we have several presentations. Since it's a very, we have a very tight schedule, I would like to ask all speakers to make the presentation within the time. 10 minutes, please try to make it within 10 minutes so that we can keep the schedule. So in session one, the first presentation is by Dr. Troy Sternberg of the University of Oxford, and his presentation is on ESG and the mining industry from his study in Mongolia. Dr. Troy, please.
University to a new audience, speaking about an original subject and how we can use ESG for, we might say, how to improve things in the global community. So today I'm going to speak about ESG and the mining industry in Mongolia. And this comes up. Okay, so when we talk about ESG, I enjoyed reading your abstracts, and much of it's quite theoretical. It's finance-based like this. So I would take my few minutes to place ESG in the real-world context, in the real-world community. And we take a picture here of mining in Mongolia, and I want to ask, where is the Yes. Push. Okay. And so in the mining industry, it's a $14 trillion industry. So it's one of the largest in the world. And here, ESG is considered by companies, by the industry, by the financing, as ESG is the greatest business risk, more than depletion of resources, decarbonization, license to operate, other factors that we see. This is also a beneficial process because a higher ESG ranking is associated with increased profits and reduced mining risk. So in that way, it's the classic win-win where you have a higher ESG rating, it's better for the company as well as for the community. One of the major issues facing the extractive industries is this idea of resource sterilization. When you have deposits, but they cannot be mined because of issues within the community that you cannot get beyond. And this is from a personal case study I've worked on in Kyrgyzstan, where there's a $100 million gold mine closed by protest in the local community over complaints of water damage, pasture restriction, no jobs, the company not talking to the communities. And so as they stormed the mine to the local community, this is a great success because the mines closed, the company evacuated, they left Kyrgyzstan. No one from the local community is in prison. So that's what the community has learned. If you want to assert your rights, this is what you need to do. And so can violence really be a resolution to the issues of ESG issues? Hopefully there's a better way, and we'll go on to that. The challenges for ESG in mining particularly are that we need mining for the future, for decarbonization, for a green economy, for the lithium, the copper, the other elements. However, the process of mining itself creates 4 to 7% of the world's greenhouse gases. So that's double aviation. So the process of getting the resources to fuel the future development actually has a great impact on the environment and the sustainability of this process. So I particularly like to research deserts and drylands. Over $1 trillion a year is invested in drylands. We think from the Middle East through Asia, Australia, other countries. So it's a massive industry where ESG can play a key role. The disconnect, though, is that ESG is driven by capital, by money, by decisions made in New York, Hong Kong, other cities around the world. So this is far removed from the impact of the actual investments. So the majority of ESG, of mining takes place in the lower and middle income countries. So it's here where we have the impact, the in situ detrimental roles that mining leads to, particularly on communities, government, and politics. And no matter what people like to say, there's a power imbalance between the local community of less educated or less empowered people and global companies, foreign investors, and governments who want the revenue from mining. So I was interested to see that Asia actually is leading the world in mineral extraction. Over 60% of the global production takes place in Asia, and in the last 20 years, we see 104% increase in this. So the center is here. It's not where I am in Europe or the Americas. So any changes will need to be here in Asia. So from there, we can zoom in on Mongolia. If you just take this as a sample of daily life, this is a herderman with his horses getting water by hand from a well. So imagine that life, and then imagine what we're going to see with extractives. So I take you to a large country, 4 times the size of Japan, but with only 3 million people. And a third of the country is still nomadic. So the environment's important for the livelihoods of the people here. We have a democracy which enables me to even do this work. So this is how we can find out about it. But it's a great challenge for Mongolia. And the red X is where we'll go shortly to see Oyu Tolgoi mine. Here's a typical Mongolian family dressed up for a picture, but this is their gear, their home. This is what we're talking about, a very simple lifestyle versus multi-billion-dollar investments. And this has been going on in the country for 20 years. And what we see is protest in Ulaanbaatar, most recently in December and January of this past winter, because the damages caused to the community and the environment in Mongolia. The government likes it for the benefit it has in taxes, development, but we see corruption, change in laws like this in order to justify practices in the mining industry. Mongolia is a democracy, so it's relatively stable, but many countries like this, we see instability, conflict, loss of livelihoods, and changes of government, such as what we saw in Kyrgyzstan after that mine incident. The industry has progressed to embrace impact assessments as a way to identify and perhaps mitigate some of these challenges that mining leads to. Environmental, social, and health impact assessments are now common, not always required, but they certainly should be. And what has happened in Mongolia and Central Asia, resource nationalism comes up, where the people demand it, and because we have democracy here, then the politicians promise this. Now, internationally, there's organizations to address these issues. International Council on Mining and Metals is the big one. There's many others, NGOs, that address these important topics. Extractive Industries, Transparency Initiative, many things out there, but a big issue that we find is that China, which is a major investor and the leading country developing mines around the world, doesn't participate in these same international organizations. In Mongolia in particular, we see the richest country in the world per capita in mineral resources. But without a balance between the investment and the communities, can it realize its potential? As we see, Chinese companies own 60% of the mines. All the export goes through China because of its geographical location. So here I take you to the Mongolia's largest mine, Oyu Tolgoi. It's called the world's largest copper and gold mine, owned by Rio Tinto, so an international corporation. And I'd actually say it's the best mine Mongolia has. And this could give us some optimism for what ESG principles can do in a developing country. But if we look outside the mine, the lights of the mine in the background, this is a lifestyle just a few kilometers away. So how do you take someone herding goats and then you have a $20 billion mega mine? How do you reconcile the two of those for a successful outcome for both parties? So when the mine was being developed, the president of the company said, we found a cash machine in the Gobi Desert. So they loved it because they come and they see an empty landscape with no people, no national parks, no NGOs, and they think they can do whatever they want. So that led to issues in the community. Many years of protest, loss of water pasture. The only surface water in the entire southern part of the country became part of the mine site. So we have an 80-kilometer mine site, 3,000 people, 130,000 animals. Where are they going to get their water? And this is what the conflict was about. And through the World Bank, through using the ESG principles, Rio Tinto, the mine, the local community sat down together, and over 6 years, had this mediation process. And here's an example: the mine on one side, the citizens on the other, where they actually discuss these key issues and come to a resolution. So it's not that the local herders were able to stop the mine, but they were able to come to an agreement where both sides could cooperate and carry on and hopefully improve the conditions in the local community. And so this is how ESG can be positive in a local context. internationally, it comes out how a group of Mongolian herders took on a mining giant. One, the local people wouldn't see it that way, but they're able to coexist. And I just note that the settlement cost Rio Tinto less than $1 million, which is just a fraction of their investment. So ESG doesn't have to be expensive, but it needs the attention of the investors. So we have a nice quote here from some Chinese researchers. Chinese ESG considerations are extraneous to investment or policy requirements. ESG activities are in infancies. ESG risk and financial benefit are underappreciated. So in this industry, in mining, until China participates equally, we're going to continue to see these challenges and these problems. Mongolia has trouble with China and the border because China will close the border, and the ability to do that means that China actually controls the viability of Mongolian mining. And as we see ongoing protests in Mongolia today, again, we can ask, where is the ESG? How does it filter out to the nation and the community? So what we learned from Mongolia in particular is that you need a well-intentioned financial considerations from the investor following ESG principles, but that ESG is removed from the reality on the ground. If we went to where the pictures I've showed, if we ask anybody, nobody will know what ESG is. It's not part of the discourse. So we can also better inform communities, and in the era of social media, they learn many things anyway. So it's to the advantage of the investor and that side of the process to engage with this. So rather than being designed only for investor and corporate benefit and the profits that stay elsewhere, for sustainability, we need to bring ESG into the nations and the communities where the investments are taking place. And just to wrap up, if we look at this, this is a line of trucks taking minerals from Mongolian mines to the Chinese border. This is one morning at 9 a.m. I was there. It's 20 kilometers long. But when we see a picture like this, where are the animals? Where are the people? Where's the livelihoods that were already in this environment? How can ESG better address this to be relevant to Mongolia as well as Rio Tinto and other mines in the area? And finally, a camel's eye view of the mine looks quite different. They kind of don't seem to care about it, but the owner of these cattle, of these camels, will find it very important. And as we hear the talks today, just take a moment to think about where is the ESG and what does it mean for environments, communities, and the local people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Troy, for the presentation, that you highlighted important points and you mentioned important questions that we hope to have their answers today with these presentations. So Dr. Troy and I are going to edit a book and the journal special issue, which is outcome of this conference and this project. So we are going to have presentation, discussing, having comments on the papers in order to improving their quality for a better book and a better, higher quality journal special issue. So next presentation is by Professor Yong-Ho Chung from Singapore University of Social Sciences. Dr. Chung is going to present on ESG performance and share value. Dr. Chung, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Homma and Professor Fahad, for inviting me to a very nice place and very interesting conference. Okay. I'm presenting my ongoing study on how ESG influence firm value, because it's a bit different from what has been presented earlier, Mr. Troy. We would like to concern on business performance, whether ESG influence business performance, so that investor may pay attention to how the ESG should be handled in firm's behavior. Okay. So this is a brief my agenda, some motivation and research objective and hypothesis, questions and specific models, definitions, some preliminary results and discussion, and where we go from here. Okay. We have seen some positive valuation effect on ESG performance for developed economy, but very little or none on developed economy, and specifically Singapore. So Singapore looks like a developed economy, but such concern on ESG is starting now. So this shows that some green movement in Singapore. So Green Plan 2030, Net Zero 2050 commitment, carbon taxes already implemented, promote electric vehicles, heavy investment in the adoption of renewable energy, although there are not much resources in Singapore, and also the energy storage system and green transport. So Singapore is more like using in 3 areas, like improving energy efficiency and using the green hydrogen, and finally the import green or clean electricity from neighboring countries, such as Laos. Okay. So Singapore has noticed that the importance of ESG and its impact on firm performance. So we want to see the ESG landscape in Singapore, also how the government and state-owned enterprise doing or influencing ESG performance. Okay. So this is our research objective, to examine whether there is value enhancing effect through the ESG effort. To do this, we employ the market value of equity as a measure of firm valuation, taken from Singapore company, and we incorporate the Olson's valuation model that measure the valuation effect through the accounting information such as book value and earnings. So this is the 2 research questions we want to answer, to examine the valuation effect of environmental, social, and government performance on Singapore companies specifically, and to determine whether the SOE has some positive impact on ESG performance. So these are 2 specific hypotheses. First hypothesis is ESG performance has a positive valuation effect on Singapore company. And second hypothesis is SOE has greater impact, influence on ESG valuation. So we have about the 7 valuation models so far. The first one is a very simple one, the book value and earnings per share. And then we add the individual ESG measures. And then third one, we just consider overall ESG performance. And fourth one is we have inactive term through ESG and social state-owned enterprise. And then the fifth one is we have individual ESG measures plus a few control variables like ESI is environmentally sensitive industry. It's a biological variable, and aside are the leverage and ages are all control variables. Then we have This one is those variables with overall ESG measures. And finally, with the overall ESG measures and inactive term and other control variables. Okay. So these are the variable definitions, something I already mentioned that. And we got data from basically the Bloomberg ESG disclosure and financial performance. So we also get the book value and earnings per share from Bloomberg from 2018 to 2022. So these are the descriptive statistics. We take a stock price as a dependent variable, and all others like ESG score and all these are the independent variables or control variables. Okay. So this is a fixed effect result. It's very disappointing. We do not see any significant effects throughout the models. And if you look at our concern is ESG, but ESG, is individual ESG or the overall ESG, does not show any statistically significant impact. So it's very puzzling. So we will see how we can rectify or improve this result. Interestingly, the state-owned enterprise has a positive impact on stock price. Okay, it's very significant, but we expect something like a positive impact on ESG and SO inactive term, but we have a negative. Okay, so this is another puzzling, and then to the end, like age shows there's some positive impact. Okay. And then we have a random effect, very similar, still shows that no individual or overall ESG doesn't show any statistically significant impact. However, the SOE, state-owned enterprise, has a positive impact. And inactive term shows that some negative impact. And other than that, some over here, ESI, the control variable, whether it's the environmental sensitive industry, in that case, stock price is negative. Okay. Then some age, like the longer the company's existence, has a positive on stock price. So, okay. Then we had the third one is just like a generalized least square. This one shows that something. So when we had this result, we was quite encouraged. But when you had the fixed effect and random effect, we don't see this kind of result. So because this one shows that like almost every variables have some level of significant impact. So we want to explain why the GLS shows that significant impact, but fixed effect, random effect shows quite different. So with this, we want to see like we just want to transform the dependent variable, which is stock price. We can take just the increase, and otherwise we treat to zero. That is one way. Another one is if we can drop the variables which appear to be not statistically significant, that we can drop, and we want to find a more suitable independent variable. Okay, so this is okay, and also whether there are any other incremental methodology we want to explore. Okay, so this is my presentation of our interim report. Okay.
Thank you very much, Professor. It's interesting, very interesting. So I have some comments that later on I will give during the discussion. Thank you very much. So let me invite our next presenter, Dr. Taghizadeh Lee from Win Future Prize Foundation of Vietnam, and also IPAG Business School of France. Taghizadeh's presentation is on unveiling the potential and perspective of ESG investment in Vietnam, that we are waiting for it. Taghizadeh, please.
All right,
Taghizadeh.
can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Good day, everyone. My name is Taghizadeh, and I'm the Managing Director of Win Future Prize Foundation, a global prize in science and technology from Vietnam that honors scientific innovations contributing to the betterment of humanity. It is my great pleasure to give a presentation today at the ESG Investment in East and Southeast Asia Conference. My speech is on unveiling the potential and perspective of ESG investment in Vietnam. Right, so as we know, the popularity of ESG investment is growing worldwide. And because the reason here is because it has the potential to promote sustainable economic development, attract foreign investment, mitigate ESG risk, and enhance global competitiveness. Developing countries with a solid commitment to ESG principle can attract a foreign investment from investors who prioritize ESG factors in their investment decision. While ESG investment is gaining traction in Asia, its adoption and implementation are still in the early stage and vary widely across countries and industry. The countries such as Japan and South Korea and Singapore have made significant progress in promoting ESG investment, with large institutional investors and pension funds taking a leading role in integrating ESG into their investment decision. China's, the world's second largest economy, is also emerging as a significant player in ESG investment. On the other hand, other countries in the region, such as India and other Southeast Asian countries, are still at an early stage of adopting ESG investment practices with limited awareness and regulatory framework. So in this study focused on Vietnam, a lower middle income but rapidly developing countries in Southeast Asia. While Vietnam has only recently started to adopt ESG practices, its government and businesses have taken aggressive action to strengthen its potential as an ESG investment hub. So, as I mentioned in the previous slide, ESG investment is gaining attraction in Asia, like Japan, South Korea, China, and Singapore, and many other countries in Asia. But the level of development is quite different. As can be seen from this figure 1, the ESG performance of 6 ASEAN countries is mixed and generally worse than the global average. Regarding the risk, all the countries except Singapore and Vietnam have ESG risk exposure higher than the average. In addition, the unmanaged ESG risk of all the countries, excluding Thailand, is above the mean. Regarding the management score, Thailand was the only country that performed better than the world average. So it's quite interesting observation. So like most countries in Southeast Asia, Vietnam is still like at the early stage of ESG investment development. The country has a limited regulatory framework and low awareness of ESG principle among investors and companies, and this has hindered ESG adoption in Vietnam. However, with the country increasing integration into the global economy and its growing focus on sustainable development, there is an opportunity for Vietnam to promote and expand ESG investment practices. Also, as the government and the market participant, work towards developing a supportive regulatory environment, sustainable economic activities and projects in Vietnam are expected to grow in the near future. Unfortunately, I cannot do like a quantitative analysis like the presentation of Professor Yong Ho, because in Vietnam, we have very limited information on the size and the growth of the ESG investment market. The reason here is because the country financial market and investment industry are still in the quite early stage of development compared to other countries. However, there are signals, there are signs that ESG investing is gaining momentum in Vietnam. For instance, in 2019, the Vietnam Corporate Sustainability Forum was launched, bringing together businesses, investors, and policymakers to promote sustainable development and responsible business practices in the country. So this figure actually presents key findings, a recent report by PwC in 2022. As you can see in the figure, 66% of the 234 survey companies have implemented an ESG program in Vietnam, with 22% of them having a comprehensive program covering all three aspects, ESG, right? So in this figure. So the next slide, I would like to talk more about the potential for ESG investment in Vietnam. First of all, we need to mention about the country's abundant natural resources, including sun, wind, and hydropower. And this had made the country have enormous opportunities for renewable energy investment. So recognizing this advantage, the governments aim to increase the renewable energy share in the country's energy mix. The government has implemented a range of policies to encourage renewable energy development in the electricity sector, including incentive for investors and streamlined approval process. So for instance, the feed-in tariff for solar energy in 2017 and wind energy in 2018 have received strong and favorable response from the investor. In 2017, the installed capacity of solar and wind power plant was only 178 megawatt, but within 3 years in 2020, it's already exploded to 17 gigawatt. And according to the most updated power development plan 8 in 2021, the rise in installed capacity will be accompanied by the rise in renewable electricity. In addition, offshore wind power plants are scheduled to operate from 2030 at 3 gigawatt and then increase to 36 gigawatt in 2045, as you can see in the figure. So all of these achievements have helped to reduce the country's reliance on fossil fuel, particularly coal, and could contribute to the significant reduction in emission of the country in the future. Vietnam also has significant potential for sustainable agricultural development with a diverse and favorable climate, abundant natural resources, and various ecosystem patterns ranging from the fertile Mekong Delta in the south to the mountains, to the mountainous regions in the north. The country has a long tradition of agriculture in a wide range of crop and farming practices. However, because the majority of participants in the agricultural sector in Vietnam are still small business and household, the sustainable agriculture has not received sufficient attention in the country. Consequently, agricultural activities contribute significantly to greenhouse gas emission and making Vietnam ranking the highest at around 29%. So these activities also impact other natural resources such as water and soil in the country. And to address this concern, the Vietnamese government has implemented various regulation and policy to mitigate agricultural sector environmental impact. Example, here is a law on environmental protection effective from January 2015. And this law outlined comprehensive ROE environmental standard, and the government encouraged private investment in smart and sustainable agriculture. Vietnam also received support from other countries and international organizations to achieve its net zero target by 2050. And for instance, Vietnam and the international partner group, including the EU, UK, France, Germany, Japan, Norway, Denmark, officially established the JETP, standing for Just Energy Transition Partnership. And this is expected to strongly support the country's net zero commitment by 2050. So in terms of social factors, Vietnam has made significant progress in reducing poverty. In this figure, as you can see, the poverty rate decreased significantly from 37.4% in 1998 to only 4.4%, less than 5% in 2020, one of the sharpest declines in poverty in the world. And in particular, the poverty rate in urban areas was only 1% in 2020. And the household wage increased significantly in terms of both nominals and the real terms, and nearly triple over the decade. Labor productivity in Vietnam also increased thanks to the improvement in education and healthcare. Regarding education, as of 2020, 95.4% of the population in Vietnam were able to read and write, and Vietnam has achieved the near universal primary school enrollment, and the average number of years of education also reached about 10 years on average. The country also have made significant strides in terms of healthcare, with improvement in life expectancy and reduction in infant and child mortality rate. In terms of income inequality, that is one of the challenges remained for Vietnam. So the income inequality is a persistent issue in the country, with significant disparities between urban and rural areas and different regions of the country. So the low income group has experienced lower income growth compared to the high income group, and this makes the increase in the wealth gap between the two groups. Occupational safety and health also an area that should receive more attention. And finally, the governance also key areas of focus for investor Vietnam. So the government has been a topic of debate, with most concerns about corruption, lack of transparency, and restriction on political freedom. However, there has been some positive development in the recent year, especially in the fight against corruption. So the government has made a lot of efforts to fight against corruption, and this has improved the corruption perception index of Vietnam over the past 5 years, from 113 to 38 in the world ranking. So in this table, I would like to show more about the differences between the lowest and the highest income group during the 2016-2020 period. So we can see the gap has been increased between the two groups, but I will skip the details so that we can save the time. All right, so the concluding remark here is that we want to prioritizing ESG principle in investment decision can create a sustainable future for Vietnam, and this can help Vietnam address environmental challenges such as pollution and climate change, and support social development, also education and affordable housing, so on and so forth. And develop ESG policy and regulation is also crucial for the government in fostering ESG investment in Vietnam. And the country can leverage on international effort and collaboration to assess global expertise network and funding to foster its ESG investment agenda and positions the country as a responsible and sustainable investment destination. Yeah, I know Fahad, you're already here to remind me of the timing. So thank you very much for your attention. And here's my contact details. If you have any questions, will you enjoy the rest of the event? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you, Taiha. The presentation was very interesting and you shared with us the Vietnamese experiences and most recent progress for ESG. So we will have discussions later. Next presentation before we have the coffee break is by Dr. Safa Fanayan, University of Oxford. Her presentation is on framework for water risk assessment in the textile and apparel manufacturing sector. Dr. Safa, please.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, so I'll share my screen. Okay. So one of the things within ESG, a lot of it is how the ESG data is collected and used, and there is a very big gap between what is collected and how accurate it is right now. And it's a developing field, so there is much to be done about it. So my research proposal and my research right now is to build a framework for comparable water risk metrics to better inform ESG data and decision-making for sustainable finance. And this is carried out currently within the textile sector, textile and garment sector of the ESG measurement and investment area. I am currently a postdoctoral research fellow at the Crawford School of Public Policy in the Australian National University. And a lot of my work has been and currently is on measuring water risks and informing policy. So why is water in the textile sector important? The textile and apparel manufacturing industry accounts for an annual revenue of 2.5 trillion annually. So it's a very big and influential sector, and it's constantly growing. The rate at which it's growing, it's very great. But also this sector generates 1/5 of the world's industrial pollution, and it uses more than 93 billion cubic meters of water. And it's very difficult to even imagine how much water this is. But it is one of the fourth largest water users if you're comparing it against agriculture also. And another big challenge of this textile industry is because of its volumes. There are billions of tons of garments produced annually, and more than 87% of it, more than 87% of what is annually produced is disposed and incinerated. So it's a big volume that we're talking about. And even if a lot of companies are doing a lot of things, for sustainability, it's the volume of it. So even a small margin has a very high impact. So it's important to consider these ESG implications of the textile sector, especially in the water area. And that picture actually is in Bangladesh, which is one of the highest textile manufacturing area. And that is actually a river on the side of the textile manufacturing region. Why textiles in Asia, and why is this sector so important for Asia? China, India, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Vietnam, Sri Lanka, these countries are the largest textile manufacturing hubs globally. There's also Pakistan and Myanmar within that area. And if you see this image, which is on the right side, this is of the overall water risk. And as you see, most of these countries which are producing high garments are among the regions that have very high water risks. That means they do not have enough water, and the water that they have is polluted. But big chunk of it is happening, of the textile manufacturing is happening in these areas. Also, Asia produces 10 times more water pollutants when compared to the rest of the world. And there's also under extreme water stress. And currently, a lot of what is going on in the name of sustainable clothing, a lot of it is greenwashing. And this greenwashing influences ESG rating, because currently ESG rating is dependent a lot on individual disclosures of companies. And the disclosures are, of course, always wonderful. They talk about recycling, but if you think about recycling, currently less than 10% of this 87 billion tons of clothes that are produced that are destroyed annually. Less than 10% are recycled into new garment production. So this whole thing of where recycling is still very, very nascent. Then there is the whole dyeing industry of the clothes that you wear. The vivid blues, the brilliant reds are some of the most toxic dyes that are used. And all of this water, that these dyes, their treatment goes, while you might say that a lot of textile industries are pushing on treatment and improving treatments in the areas where they're producing, there is a big lag between treatment that's happening and the wastewater that is being generated through all of these clothing processes. And you saw that those colors of the rivers around it. But when you see the textile companies, the ESG rating of them is low risk. That is not comparable to the visuals and the extent of damage that you're seeing in a lot of the countries where more than 80% of these companies, like your H&M, your Zara, your 80% of the clothes that they produce are produced in Asia. And that is where the biggest chunk of, so there is a big disconnect between current ESG rating and the reality that is happening. And now taking the example, so this research objective of mine, of this proposal and this work that I'm doing, is to develop a versatile framework. And versatile because a lot of investment firms grapple with information and making quick decisions. So I'm trying to make it a framework that is as robust, but also easily implementable, because you want it to be used and accessed by as many institutions as possible, as many investment decision-making processes as possible. So a versatile framework that enables the creation of a standardized metric for measuring water-related risks of the garment and textile manufacturing industries, or specific companies. So what I want to create is a metric that you can compare across companies. So a company, if the metric comes up at 20, that means it's really doing very badly. If it comes up at 50, 60, that means it's making sustained efforts towards improving its environmental impacts. And this framework will allow meaningful comparison between companies operating within this sector. And it's a useful tool to then see how companies are doing and where they can improve. The methodology for this. Now, when you look at the textile and garment manufacturing sector, this is the supply chain, and you cannot not consider their impacts through all of their supply chain. Currently, most of the ESG metric that is being voluntarily disclosed by a lot of companies is this. It is the stitching and production prep, which has social implications for how human resources being used, how human resources in the people who are stitching the garment, the security for them and the welfare for them and fair wages, which is an important consideration. But there is very little insight or disclosures into the raw materials that are being sourced, into the yarn that is being produced, into the fabrics and the coloring and the dyes. And also the end of wash and use. Currently, the fabrics that we have, if you use a lot of polyester, a lot of microfibers from those polyesters return back into our rivers, and it's what we are consuming. And then there is the end of life. Because of the volumes that are being produced, how is this end of life? Is it even being considered by the companies? Because this idea of recycling right now is so minimal. While there's efforts going on into improving, and a lot of companies have given commitments to 100% within 10 years, what would that recycling look like? Because currently the virgin material is much more cheaper. And what is this virgin material? You have polyester, you have cotton, you have bamboo, leather, wool, but the leather, wool, bamboo is in viscose material. All of this constitutes a very small percentage right now. So there has to be consideration along this whole system to be able to bring out a viable metric that can then be compared across companies. Because currently we are only comparing companies based on their tier 1 disclosures and voluntary disclosures on other things. So it's whether they're using sustainable dyes, it could be 2% of their whole clothing line is using sustainable dyes, but because they advertise it so much, their ESG rating becomes very good. Currently within the, within this life cycle analysis, there are two things that are important. One, for a specific company, one is the composition, because it's difficult to analyze companies. What do you take? So for me, what I've done is I've broken down it based on their fabrics that the companies use. So there's cotton, there's synthetics, there's other natural materials, wool and viscose. These are the big 5. And so these become the basis on which I assess the whole life cycle impact. And another thing is that the volumes that are produced by a company that is producing 3.5 billion garments annually is very different in its impact from a company that is producing, say, 1,000 garments or 10,000 garments annually. So there is that difference also that needs to be considered. So when they are producing 3.5 billion garments, and they make a lot of efforts to be sustainable, every small aspect of it has very high implications, trickle-down effect. Now, example of H&M, not because I want to target them specifically, but because H&M is a very big industry, very big producer. It has a big stake in the volumes that is being produced. And it's also doing a lot of efforts on sustainability, and it's marketing a lot of its efforts on sustainability. It has signed up to a lot of pacts and zero discharge waste. However, if you look at where H&M is processing and producing, it is mostly, big chunk of it is in Asia. You have Bangladesh, China, Turkey, except for Turkey, India, Indonesia, Myanmar, Pakistan, Vietnam, Cambodia. And now if you look at how these countries assess their weight, how these countries, are they good? Do they have good policy systems in waste treatment? This is the country level environmental performance on wastewater treatment. The countries where big chunk of the production is happening have almost zero zero reputation on wastewater treatment. While there might be individual attempts policy-wise, it is not doing very great. But this is where the biggest, so that says something in the way either, and this was mentioned previously also by one of the other participants, that a country level policy influences a policy, and implementation of those policies influences the dynamics of the investment in that country. So this could be, in one way, understanding this could help improve local policy. So how am I doing this metric? Is I'm using these existing information on environmental performance, which there is a whole database of it from the Yale Environmental Performance Index. And I'm looking at it in terms of water quality and water quantity that is being used, and going along the different life cycle stages, and also providing space for mitigation that some companies are doing. They're like, we're doing wonderful things in terms of saving water. So you want to take that into consideration. But there are many companies that also do not provide information on barely anything. So then creating proxy industry standards to allow that comparison to continue. And I don't know how much time I have left, sorry.
Okay,
Um,
we're running out of time.
Okay. So how I'm trying to do this is stage-wise, have companies disclose information, but 80% of the companies will disclose tier 1 information, which is the stitching and the, putting together of the final garment. But while that has high social impacts, that has very little environmental impacts. And that is what is most disclosed. Tier 2 information about, currently because of pressures on companies, about 50% of 30 to 40% of companies are disclosing their tier 2 information. Tier 3 is where your threads are being produced. That very few companies, like there's 20%, and tier 4 is where your raw materials are coming from. Like maybe there's 1% of companies that disclose that information. So for tier 4, I have created standards based on global averages of where cotton was produced, where high levels of polyester are produced. And the rest is compared against company disclosures. One of the benefits of some of the benefits and implications of this method is that this metric is then comparable against companies and based on the size of company and the impact of the company. Second is that it encourages disclosures, because if you're not disclosing, then averages are being used, and the averages of the textile industry is not great. And it also builds accountabilities towards the commitments that are signed. Many of these companies, like we saw H&M, have signed many commitments, but these commitments are voluntary disclosures and voluntary adherence to these commitments. And there is very little third party, except for a few of them. Others have very little third party accountability of whether companies are adhering to their commitments. So this metric can help build that third party accountability. And also finally, it gives better ESG data for more accurate, sustainable investment strategies for a lot of financial companies. Thank you. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Safal, for the interesting presentation. So before we go to the coffee break, let's have discussion for a few minutes on these 4 presentations. So I have some comments before I ask other participants. So Dr. Troy's presentation was interesting. He mentioned some questions but not answer. So we are waiting for the answer, that this is the issue. So in a country, in a developing country or less developed countries, yes, it is clear that when opening industries, it has some negative externalities, but we cannot close these industries because people need income, need food, need development, need growth. So what is your suggestion and solution or answer to these questions that you have mentioned? To Dr. Yong-Hoo Chang's presentation is interesting. My comment is that too many explanatory variables. So there is possibility of serial correlation. So I didn't see the autocorrelation matrix. So maybe a serial correlation exists. So please check for the possibility of correlation among your explanatory variables. Secondly, you found that there is a relationship between ESG investment and firm performance for SOEs. How to explain it theoretically? Why investing in ESG can result in better firm performance? Because maybe by data you found it, definitely you reached to this result, but how it could be explained by economic theory? This is second comment. And third comment, I haven't seen your paper yet. Did you do to know whether we need to rely on fixed effect or random effect results? And Taiha's presentation is interesting. So this is more qualitative work, which is suitable for the book. In your policies, in the policy parts that you describe about the Vietnamese experiences, you mainly focus on feed-in tariff. So energy and climate is one field in ESGs. So although you highlighted some other indicators related to G and S, but please explain more in your chapter about G and S, not just focusing on E. And you mentioned some progress. So we know that there are good progress, good economic growth in Vietnam, especially during the last decade. But why? I mean, please also talk about the weaknesses, because we don't want to just introduce, we want to challenge, we want to discuss that what are the weaknesses and what are the solutions in order to foster the sustainable growth and achieving the ESG goal. On Safa's presentation, maybe Dr. Troy has some comments if you have. So these are from my side. If other participants, Dr. Troy and other speakers have any comment, questions, so let's collect the comments and questions first and then answer from the participants. Thank you very much. Any other comment, question from the participants on these presentations? So there is also one question in the chat box in Zoom from Dr. Yongko Chang, that this is a minor question, but what do the mean and max numbers for the firm size mean in descriptive statistic? That's a very large number. Okay, so these really say that I mean Tamasaki or SOEs became profitable because they became more environmental friendly?
Here we don't have a Tamasaki holdings.
Yeah.
Okay. But like individual country, whether ownership is higher than certain threshold, we set by the code. Yeah.
So I mean, in order to have implication and in order to saying something concrete, we need to test for the nature of the relationship, whether there is a causality or whether these are happening just simultaneously and there is just a
Yeah, we already have done study test for all individual variables, but I don't report.
Okay. So please bring it. Thank you very much. And next, Taiha, do you want to say something?
Sorry, you are asking me something, Fahad? Are you talking to me?
We cannot hear Taiha. Is this mute? Can you, is this not mute, the projector?
I can
would
hear
please
you. You
speak?
cannot hear me?
Yeah. Okay, please.
Can you repeat your question again, Fahad?
Yeah, my question is,
I think it's echo from your side. Yeah, but now I cannot hear. No sound.
okay. So please mute. Okay, so my question is that you mainly focus on E, and when talking about the policies, for example, feed-in tariff was successful for the case of Vietnam and renewable energy developed. You highlighted some, I mean, indicators from S and G, but in your chapter, please try to talk about all of them, not just focusing on E and climate change, but also talking about gender equality, talking why, for example, reducing corruption was not successful, what are the challenges, what are the barriers, and try to provide some recommendation in order to make the current situation better, to be useful for Vietnam and other emerging economies. Okay.
All right, thank you. Actually, I just have a quick feedback to your suggestion. In terms of the times of the presentation, I choose to focus more on the E part of the ESG, and somewhat I touch on the S parts like inequality, income inequality, labor productivity, and so on and so forth. But I would certainly discuss more about the corruption aspect in my paper and provide more recommendation in this regard. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And next, Safa, do you want to answer to the question that raised by Dr. Troy?
I could not hear the question. I'm sorry, it was on mute.
I couldn't hear.
Hello? I didn't hear the question that was asked. Sorry. It was on mute back then.
Okay. So he's asking about where are other factors in the tiers when you, I mean, categorize these tiers, other factors like
Other
water.
factors?
Did
So
you consider them?
Other factors, as in the whole thing is around water risks. When you mean other factors such as other environmental factors?
In order to have a more comprehensive analysis, considering different factors. So do you want to widen your analysis or you just want to focus on these factors?
Eventually for others, maybe yes, but for this one, for textile industry, water is the biggest environmental risk. there is also environmental risks such as the greenhouse gas emission, but that's mostly in transport around and that there is existing methodologies on that, and that part is more clearer available. And there is, especially for the greenhouse gas emissions, and that part is more better covered and understood, and work is being done on it. But on the aspects of water, there is very little information on it right now. So that's why that's the part that I focused on, and it can complement data of the greenhouse gas emissions as well. It can be added to it. And there's the social dimension also, which can be added as well.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Another thing that can be covered, I don't know if in this research you can use it or whether in future research, is the source of origin of raw materials that definitely
Yes, that is taken into consideration
for the transportation, and that is also one of the causes of climate change, global warming, and so on. But maybe for this research, you cannot enter it, and it will change your research. But maybe for your future research, it can be used. Anyway, thank you very much. So let's have a break, a coffee break for about 10 minutes, because we have a shortage of time, and then we will come back at 11:40, okay? 11:40 with 3 other presentations of this session. Thank you. Okay, welcome back to the second part of the morning session. Welcome back to the second part of the morning session. So in this part, we are going to have 3 presentations. And the first one is a joint presentation by Professor Hyun-Suk of Yonsei University, Korea, and Dr. Ha-Eun from Korea University. Their presentation is on study on the impact of market competition and environmental risk on ESG activities and value of firm. So Dr. Han, please.
Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you for giving a chance to present our paper here. It is my great honor to present in front of this great audience. And last week, we changed our title into the effect of market competition and environmental risk on environmental, social, and governance practices, greenwashing, and firm value. So as you can guess from our title, we were going to examine how the market competition and the industry's environmental risk can affect to the firm's ESG activities and its firm value. So our motivation of the study was that because the ESG performance is now a global issue and there is a market pressure to the firm to do more ESG activities nowadays. But in the manager's perspective, doing the ESG activities could be also a very costly activities to the firm. So our question was that how firm will manage ESG performance with the market pressure from industry environmental factor. So if the managers view ESG activities as a profit maximizing strategy in the long term, they will try to do more ESG activities. But in otherwise, if the managers think that ESG activities decreases firms should run profit as it is a huge cost, then they will try to deduct their ESG activities in a such industry environment factor. So we are going to see how the industry's competitive can affect to the firm's ESG activities and what would happen by the environmental risk industry can affect this and this relationship. So we were focusing on the competitive intensity of the industry because in a competitive environment, the companies need to perform better than their counterparts. So if the managers see the ESG activities to provide firms a competitive advantage, and if they think that these activities can enhance their corporate reputation, they will try to do more ESG activities. But if they think that doing the ESG activities will decrease the firm's short-term performance because it is costly, then they will decrease the ESG activities. And also, the environmental risky firms will improve their environmental position by presenting their environmental efforts to the public, and because they will have a more market pressure to do the ESG activities, the firms may do more ESG activities in the environmental risky industry, but otherwise, if they are in the industry with high environmental risk, that means they have to use more cost to do the ESG activities, then they might decrease the doing that kind of activities. So this is our research summary. So we found that if the firms is in the high competitive intensity industry, they will reduce the ESG activities and also the greenwashing behavior because they think doing the ESG activities will deduct their profit, but also doing the greenwashing can decrease their reputation, and that could be risky. And the environmental risk also increase the ESG activities because of the market pressure, but in the high environmental risk industry, the firms would do more greenwashing because it is costly to do the ESG activities, but they have to show to the investor that they are doing some kind of activities. And we also look for the firm value, and we found that the competition and the environmental risk itself does not affect to the firm value, but if the firms are doing the ESG activity in high competition and in the high environmental risk industry, then that could decrease the firm value. So by this paper, we thought we could give some kinds of implications. So we thought that first we could highlight the importance of competitive intensity and environmental risk in determining a company's ESG activities, greenwashing behavior, and firm value. And we thought that we could give some evidence about how the firms would react to the market competition and environmental risks. So we thought we could contribute to understanding how market competition and environment risk can affect firms' ESG practices and how it could also affect to the firm value. So because we're running out of time, I will just summarize our prior literature related to our topic. So the industry competition can give a positive effect on the ESG activities and also can give a negative effect on the ESG activities. So in some perspective, doing the ESG activities can be a differentiation strategy to the firm, showing that they are doing what investors want to the firm. But in the negative point, doing that kind of ESG activities can be a cost, and that can decrease the firm's profit, right, a day. So the investors would want firms to have a greater profit, and because the ESG is a cost, then investors might not want them to do more ESG activities. So there can be the positive effect and the both negative effect of the industry competition on the ESG. So our hypothesis is that because there is a pro and cons to do the ESG activities, there will be differences in ESG activities based on the intensity of competition within an industry. So if the firms want to have a competitive advantage by doing the ESG activities and enhance their corporate reputation, they will increase their their ESG activities, but if they think that doing that could decrease their profit, and they would not do the ESG activities. And also the firms in the highly environmental risk industry can react differently with the low environmental risk industry, because the company with high environmental risk face challenges in implementing ESG activities to the high cost and uncertainty associated with such investments. So our first hypothesis is that industry competition and environmental risks faced by a company will affect its ESG activities. And then our second hypothesis is about the greenwashing. So again, because the market pressure on the firm is to invest on the ESG activities, and the firms in the high competition may react different to this kind of market pressure. They might would like to do some greenwashing and show like they are doing the activities, or because the greenwashing can reduce their reputation, they might not try to do the greenwashing behavior. And also the environmental risk can affect into this relationship. Our second hypothesis is that competition within the industry and environmental risk faced by a company will result in companies engaging in greenwashing activities, and market competition can positively and negatively affect greenwashing. So we use the sample from Korea data from 2015 to 2020. So the Korea Institute of Corporate Governance and Sustainability disclosed the ESG score of the firms. So we use this information and we run a regression using this kind of variables. So for the competition within the industry, we use the Hoffinger index because it was one of the widely used index to calculate the competition of the industry. And because the Hoffinger index will increase with the low competition, for convenience of interpretation, we multiplied -1 to the Hoffinger index. And also we use the risky industry from the Gracia et al. 2017. They introduced this kind of industry would have a high environmental risk. So we followed their paper. And we use the ESG score disclosed by the KCGS, and we calculated the greenwashing score using the Yu et al. 2020 paper and Zhang 2022 paper, which used the difference between the disclosure score and the ESG performance score. So we use the regression model to examine our hypothesis. First, we looked about how the market competition can affect to the ESG score of the firm. And then we subsample the firms into the high and low environmental risk industries. And we also run a regression, including the interaction term of the risky industry and the competitive industry. And we did the same research, we used the same research model for the greenwashing too. So I will just skip our descriptive statistic and the correlation. And this is our research. So for the hypothesis one, we looked about how the market competition can affect to the firm's ESG. In the high competition industry, they will reduce the ESG score. That means the manager think that doing the ESG activities is a cost to the firm, and that would not give a competition to fit the counterparts and will reduce the ESG score. And we divided the sample into the high environmental risk industry and low environmental risk industry. And we found that the relationship between the market competition and ESG score only showed from the high environmental risk industry. So this means that greater competition in industry with greater environmental risk leads to greater reduction in ESG performance, because it is much more costly to do the ESG activities in the high environmental risk industry, and does not contribute to the significantly to short-term profit. But it does not show in the low environmental risk industry because it might not be that much costly activities in low environmental risk industry. And we thought that a high risk industry, the market competition would give a negative effect on the ESG score. And this is result for the hypothesis 2. Now we watched the firm's greenwashing behavior, and we found that if the firm is in the high competition industry, they would not do the greenwashing behavior, because the increased competition means that consumers have more opportunities to switch to other products. And if a firm is found to be greenwashing in a competitive market, then customers would choose the other products rather than using these firm's products. So they may, they may lose the customers, and that could reduce their reputation. So they would not like to try the greenwashing behavior. But if there is they are in a low environmental risk industry, they would not do the greenwashing behavior. But if they are in a high environmental risk industry, still it is so costly to do the real activities to increase their ESG score. They will try to do the greenwashing to reduce that cost. So we can find the same research also with using the interaction terms. So you can see that in the risky environment, with the higher competitive industry, the firms would do more greenwashing, because doing the real activity is so costly. They have to show that they are doing the activities to the investors. And we did some additional tasks to see how the firm value would differ by this kind of activity. So we used the Tobin's Q as the firm value, and found that the market competition and the risky environment itself did not affect to the firm value, but in the high environmental risky industry, if the firms is in the competitive industry and they are doing more ESG activities, that can decrease the firm value. But this relationship did not came from the low environmental risk industry, showing that high ESG score, high competition can decrease the effect of ESG score on the firm value in high environmental risk industry, as doing the ESG activities are considered as a cost, and it is more costly in the high environmental risk industry. So again, this is our research summary. So we looked about how the market competition can affect to the firm's ESG activities, and how the environmental risk can affect into this. We found that their ESG activities and reduce their greenwashing behavior, but if they are in a high environmental risky industry, then they will try to increase ESG activities, but by using the greenwashing.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ann. So this is very
I
interesting.
will end my presentation.
It's new that you brought competition, the association of competition, greenwashing, and environmental awareness. So this is a interesting and new paper. Okay, so next presentation. So we are going to have 2 more presentations before launch. Just since we have shortage of time, I would like to ask Dr. Darish David. Next presentation is by Dr. Darish David, to make it as short as possible. And after that, Dr. Sakib. So Dr. Darish, would you please start your presentation? Dr. Darish David is from SIM Global Education of Singapore, and his co-author in this work is Miss Sanjana Williams from Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia area. And their presentation is on private sector ESG investment in companies incorporating reporting in ASEAN. Dr. Darish, nice to see you online, and we are waiting for your presentation. Dr. Darish.
Thank you, Dr. Farhad. You can hear me, right? You can hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Can you see it now? Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I'll just run through this in 10 minutes. It's quite a lot to cover, but I'll just try to summarize my slides. We are looking at our study. The purpose of the study, just going to quickly run through this. But as we have the NDCs, the countries are trying to meet their climate and net zero targets as well. They're trying to meet these targets. There's a lot going on where national governments are trying to ramp up their industrial goals to meet those net zero, mostly by around 2050, and some intermediate target by 2030. We also see that there's a huge potential and a gap in the private sector. So that's where our work comes in, and there's less literature as well. So that's one of the reasons I will mention where it's less. So we wanted to look at where this gap is there, and then where the public sector itself cannot fill that funding gap. And that's when the private sector itself has to kind of align themselves, both from the supply and demand side. So we're going to look at that, and then focus on Southeast Asia. And then it's important to kind of look at the ESG metrics, which usually is what is really heavily being used by corporates to, both on the supply and demand side. One is to kind of report on that from the private companies, and the investor side, they're assessing these companies when they invest in them based on these ESG frameworks and also standards. So our objective is to basically look at the ASEAN regulators' initiatives, so the government public sector initiatives to push this. Mainly this will mainly include the stock exchanges. So we will show you the data. So to quantitatively look for the publicly listed companies in ASEAN countries and their ESG scores. This is not completely available for all the countries, but we do have some private sector companies that are tracking this, like the MSCI. So we'll be using MSCI mostly. And then we also look at the other side on the demand side for this, as in the companies that are investing into these companies. They usually look at ESG investment strategies and frameworks. Here, there is not much quantitative data because they will not disclose this. So we will actually look at whatever qualitative data that they give. Here also, we don't know the largest private sector companies investing in this in ASEAN. So we will use case studies eventually. Today, we will just be presenting one of the case studies. And then we look at the end to close off. We look at to understand the challenges that, there are the understand the challenges which we already kind of know initially, but obviously we will find more, which is like public policy initiatives and legislations, lack of integrated standards and data in the market itself. And also one of the major crucial things is open and accessible data, where people can track this, which is right now in the private domain. This study, to document this study, was my own interest because I used to work at the United Nations Global Compact, which is basically driving corporate sustainability. And within that, if you look at the sustainable finance there, these are the two main things that come out of that, and I wanted to document it, especially for ASEAN. In terms of our research methodology, we are looking at the ESG performance indicators across the ASEAN market, and the analysis will be from 2015 to 2023, but it depends on the data as well, which is available. Right now, we don't have that data. We most probably will be getting it from MSCI. So, sorry, I got the spelling wrong there. And then there are other standards as well. We'll try to see if we can get that data from any other source as well, if possible, because all of them will have slightly different way they assess and have the rankings and the grade and the and the final assessment marks, like the quantitative marks that they give to these companies. We will show you how that looks as well. So we'll also qualitatively look on the demand side, which I kind of mentioned, for these companies' data so that they can invest in them. So we are looking mainly at Temasek, but we'll try to get other examples, case studies as well. It's quite difficult to get their information because they're not going to reveal that. It's their business strategy, so they're not going to reveal that. But whatever we get, we'll try to also include that. And then we'll want to summarize the policy frameworks in the region and the challenges and potential recommendations, more from a policy side. So supply side, we're looking at many of these countries. In terms of corporate sustainability reporting, these are quite Singapore is the one that's got compulsory reporting requirements, and especially, I mean, they started this in 2017, aligning with the TCFD. So all listed companies have to report, they have to submit a sustainability report, including their financial report every year. So this is quite good, but coming from a public sector, from the exchange itself, to push this forward, but the quality in terms of how can we assess them is still a question. And then for Malaysia, there is some requirement, especially when they have to initially list, but not actually on an annual basis. So but they do not have a mandatory framework as well. That's like an early stage because they don't actually require to do it. So you can just choose which framework you want to do. The easiest would be the SDGs, because the SDGs are accessible and available to the public. And then there's Thailand as well. Here also there is some basic requirements, but not really compulsory. So these are a few of the 3 countries that we've covered, but we'll cover it for the rest for the entire study. We hopefully will target 6 countries because those are the ones that have the larger activity around corporate sustainability and tracking and reporting. Okay, in terms of there are some recent studies by, say, KPMG. This is like a huge interest in the private sector, so all the big 4 and the other companies also tracking this. So we do see that we try to based on their analysis, we do see that how ASEAN is performing, and we do see compared to the world. Obviously, the global average will be quite poor when it comes to, say, Africa or some other regions, but while it will be very advanced when it comes to, say, the West, Europe and America and Australia maybe. So ASEAN is actually kind of mostly in doing slightly better or around the global average. So if you see for annual reports, they're slightly doing better. For materiality and all that, they're doing much better. SDGs slightly less. On the bottom, you can see that governance related risks are actually, it's really low globally as well, but so the G part is usually weak. The S part is, the E part is usually the strongest. And if you see biodiversity, they're already not doing a great job, considering that this is a risk, because considering that they do have a lot of natural resources, biodiversity and natural forest stock and all that. It's kind of not a good sign. So moving on, if you see this is interesting because the general knowledge in the general understanding in sustainable finance in the region is that if you look at the Asia data, there is evidence that across all the indexes and all the data providers, this is MSCI, but it will be similar for, say, Sustainalytics or other data providers as well. So if you see them, the cumulative index, if you see how the stock performance is doing, there's already evidence that sustainable companies that score higher on sustainability are actually doing better than the average the average companies. This is basically mid and large stock. Large cap stock, and these there's already evidence that they are doing better. So that's a good sign, which means that there's more interest in this, and that's why all the private sector from the investment side and the corporate side are interested in this. And in the right, if you see that it's just in terms of country weight, you can see that ASEAN is actually quite small. It's only 11% of Asia. So the heavyweights are Japan, China, Taiwan, and Korea and India. So ASEAN is still a smaller market, although we're looking at it. I think it'll just be interesting to see how they're also moving towards more sustainable ESG linked or sustainability linked indicators and reporting standards. Okay, in terms of the regulations in ASEAN and on ESG corporate finance, you can see that the smaller countries usually are lagging behind. So the countries that with more finance are actually leading. So obviously it's Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia are all trying to integrate this ESG reporting, ESG written guidance to provide them training as well, and market coverage, and also bond listing and all the other sustainable finance instruments that require some. So the smaller countries, obviously, because of the scale, do not have these. Some of them do not have the requirements. And in terms of the market cap too, they're all about like close to about 500 trillion, 200 to 500 trillion in terms of the stock exchanges. And in terms of corporate reporting in ASEAN, in terms of the standards they use, I mean, there are many, if you know. So there's like IRC, GRI, SASB, SDGs, and TCFD. So these, if you see, most of them are aligning, most of the stock exchanges in the countries are aligning towards GRI and and the SDGs. SDGs because they're very easy to access as well. GRI is especially for reporting. For these companies, so global reporting initiative. So that's the more of the popular ones. But just to let you know, I mean, in case you're not aware, that there is more convergence in these standards. So there is also some push towards aligning these standards together, so that companies find it easier to just submit one reporting using one reporting framework instead of having to do this in multiple reporting frameworks for different corporate investors. So that's something that's quite interesting, and it's moving on. I actually worked on this in the Singapore market, where they were when the SGX, which is the Singapore Exchange, was trying to make it compulsory, and then they used the TCFD. But as you can see, it depends on the number of companies actually reporting there as well. So okay, to move on. In terms of the companies, we're going to look at the MSCI data. We haven't done that completely because we still have to get the data, and it's proprietary, so hopefully we'll get it. Although it says 10 ESG rated companies, we're just showing the top 2 right now, just to give you an idea of the scores and the ratings. But then basically we'll try to get as much data as we can, say from MSCI or some data provider, and then look at the data to do some basic quantitative analysis in terms of market cap and ESG rating. And even within the ESG rating, there's a breakdown of the ES and G, and we'll try to look at where they're performing. Obviously, the hypothesis is that E will be much higher, their ratings and their ability to report and also score, and while S and G might be limited. And then if you see, mostly Singapore companies and Malaysia companies are doing much better compared to Indonesia, mainly because of the awareness. And that is also the case in Thailand, which is doing much better compared to, these are just the top companies, so it is biased, of course, but I'm just saying. And then compared to Philippines, and then Vietnam is much lower. Also, market cap is difficult to get because many of them are state-owned as well, so we might get difficulty in getting that data. But in terms of the demand side, it's a more tricky part. So we're trying to cover that. So basically, we're looking at the case study of Temasek, which is basically it's a fund kind of semi-government as well. So they actually have declared themselves to be into ESG, using ESG metrics and impact investment, which is another category as well, because they want to make positive impact, which is going even beyond net zero, and for the SNG, providing positive impact. And here we will be looking at this is their strategy. So I mean, there's just that they're going to work on investing in climate aligned opportunities in terms of the companies that they invest in. This is their own journey, so I'm not going to touch this. This is not part of our study, the scope on the right. And then enabling carbon negative solutions and encouraging decarbonization efforts in business. So they are taking that big across Singapore and also throughout the region. So that's something that we will try to cover in terms of their. So this is how their portfolio looks right now, and how it has decreased in 2022 in terms of the companies that they're investing in, but as you can see, they are working heavily on carbon intensity, and the data itself we haven't really broken it down, but this is just an idea of how it looks like. And then Temasek is a sovereign wealth fund. So one of our thought right now is to maybe look at any sovereign wealth funds or similar to kind of state-owned wealth funds that are trying to align to ESG metrics to make sure that they're they're responsible to their investors. So that's something that we are looking into as the case studies. So maybe looking at 3 or 4 case studies across the 6 countries in ASEAN. And then in terms of the results and challenges, we do see that ESG taxonomy is already being implemented, so that's a good thing. There's also the ASEAN ESG taxonomy and like sustainable finance taxonomy that's being implemented. So there'll be more alignment on that. Then the private sector companies, most of them are still at a very early stage in understanding and implementing ESG. So even local banks like, say, UOB or any other bank in Singapore, which is kind of the more sustainable finance hub in ASEAN, it's still hard to get their companies to promote ESG. But there is some alignment coming, mainly because of, say, requirements from science-based targets or other standards where companies require. The larger MNCs require smaller companies to reduce their scope 3 emissions. So that's something that is a good sign the push coming from within the industry itself. And then there's also implementing ESG finance targets for financial institutions is still yet to happen. Getting that data is also quite really difficult. So challenges have been getting ESG performance data, which is right now in the hands of private sector, not really available to the public sector. So that should be something that should move on as a publicly accessible data to push corporate sustainability. And in terms of private sector investors, that what frameworks they use, and what sometimes they use proprietary stuff. So that's difficult to get as well. So that's another challenge for us in the study. But we'll just try our best to kind of at least document it so that it'll be useful for the academic community, because not much has been done academically, while there's a lot of interest in the private sector for this topic. And then to conclude, for governmental, political, and regulator perspective, we need to move into having more a clear understanding and then alignment on the taxonomy itself to avoid the greenwashing that many of the speakers have already talked about before. Then also we need more. Instead of soft laws, we need like something along what SGX has done in Singapore, where at least you have some form of compulsory reporting, whether you either have to explain if you don't submit why you haven't done a sustainability reporting report for your company, which is compulsory now for listed companies. We need more open data for coordination, and that's really important for us. And then we also need to work closely with mega banks and the ecosystem within the private sector and to drive this forward. I think there's a lot of interest from investors coming in from the Western investors who have these metrics, and they are really answerable to their shareholders and their board. But in the East, that's a bit slow. So hopefully that's the hypothesis. So we need to kind of test that as well. So I'll stop with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Darish. So it's very interesting chapter. You did very comprehensive review, and I'm sure this is going to be one of the interesting chapters in this book. Thank you. So the final presentation before we have lunch break is by Professor Saqib bin Amin from North South University of Bangladesh, along with his colleagues and also myself. This is my joint chapter on role of banks and non-banking financial institution in accelerating ESG investments, perspective from ASEAN. So Dr. Saqib, please.
Thank you. The chair of the session, Farhad, distinguished scholars, and ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to all of you. As Farhad mentioned, I'm Saqib Amin from North South University of Bangladesh. And at the outset, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to all the organizers for arranging this event and also inviting me in this
like if you look at the data in between 2009 and 2020, the overall CO2 emission of the region was around 1,400 metric ton, and the growth rate of this CO2 emission increased up to a 5%. If you compare this with next, please. If you compare this. Yes, thank you. If you compare the data with the US and European perspective, in the US, the growth rate between these 14 years was negative, which is minus 0.62%, and in the European Union, so it was around 0.79%. And you can see the list of the top emitters within the ASEAN region. So it was evident, no doubt, from the literature that, the climate change and the declining environmental conditions like air pollution, the scarcity of drinkable water, contaminated land, posing a severe threat to the public health, productivity, and also to some extent the economic prosperity within the region. So given this background, it is quite obvious that one of the questions is towards an inclusive and green economy, which in turn requires sustainable investment, which are environmental friendly, low carbon, and climate resilient. And such investment can achieve the double dividend issue, and not in terms only having tackling the environmental issues, but also underpinning the balance and sustained growth of the region. And as you all know, that actually sustainable investment is a type of investment which can incorporate the environment, social, and governmental factors, and thereby contributing to targets in terms of cutting the greenhouse emissions, and also switching actually from energy sources being fossil fuels to renewables. And it was also evident in the literature that despite the fact that the developed countries almost achieved the SDG goals, but the ASEAN region within the other developing and energy economics, they might have some issues to achieve the targets within 2030 because of the COVID disruption, the development projection, and SDG implementation targets may be hampered. And ESG can actually, as an event project, ESG can play a very important role. I highlighted a few of the SDGs as ever in the literature. And yes, it's obvious, ESG can play a very, very important role for the effective implementing policies to the SDGs as a complementary initiatives. And what is the motivation of this study? Following the, ASEAN Green Bond Standards in November 2017, the ASEAN Capital Market Forum initiated two important, steps: ASEAN Social Bond Standards, along with the ASEAN Sustainability Bond Standards. So these initiatives are actually aligned to enhance transparency and uniformity of ASEAN green, social, and sustainability bonds, and to assist the global investors to make a firm decision in terms of their investment. And although, still we have to go, ASEAN economy, banking industry have to go a lot to compare with the European and US economy, but I must need to admire that they have achieved a lot in terms of growth rates of green finance, innovation, and investment because of the rigorous initiatives of the government and other stakeholders. But still the issue is that there actually lack of, because of the varying levels of ESG disclosure and transparency in terms of the policies, regulation, and the multicultural issues. The main motivation of the paper is that the bank and the non-financial bank can play a very, very crucial role in terms of this, ESG investment. So, and as you can see from the other speakers, the issue of the data availability, of the very challenging issue of the doing research for ESG investment in ASEAN. So for the analytical part, I am proposing an ecosystem, as you can see that how government, in addition to the government and the other investors, the investment management companies, how bank actually and non-financial companies can introduce a regulatory mechanism through which they can invest the individual investors, institutional investors to create awareness and promote them to invest in the ESG investment. We all know that actually the companies, the banks, they are well aware about the CSR responsibility. So what I'm actually trying to promote that the bank can have a separate schemes in terms of promoting the ESG culture in addition to the CSR. So that's why there should be a regulatory requirement, and through the regulation, along with some sort of regional affiliation, regional committee, government bank can promote this ESG culture within the ASEAN region. And they can also leverage in the market by introducing the green bond and also the other ESG related bonds. So to do so, we need to highlight on 4 important steps. If you look at the data, for example, UHSBC, UN, they highly recommended that one of the key driving forces, as we can see, the investors investors' perspective, one of the key driving forces to promote environment for the ESG investment is the regulatory requirement. However, if you look at the data from the literature, if you look at the real life scenario, actually still we have to ESG investment within the region do not reach a satisfactory level in compared to their developed counterpart because of the lack of absence of the regulatory requirements. So we propose that it is a crucial time to refine or maybe to some extent reintroduce the regulatory mechanism, a well-defined regulatory mechanism, comparable mechanism, so that we can actually give confidence to the investor in order to promote the ESG investment. Without this, we have to go far. The second thing is that it is very important from the ESG perspective, investment perspective. The investors would like to know how their investment is going to be utilized in terms of the 3 pillars of the ESG. So it should be transparent, and the investors should have the clear, a clarification regarding their investment. It is going to be invested in the environmental side or the government side or the corporate side. So it is also important to have a sound ESG system integration to answer all the potential questions to the investors to gain or strengthen their confidence. Moving on, also it is found that actually, if you look at the scenario of the Western countries, it's a regular phenomenon to rate the ESG related projects. However, in the ASEAN region, I have found that actually there was not such event. Yes, you can find a few of the companies are rating their ESG issue investment, but it's not a regular process. So what we propose in this paper is to introduce a mandatory, risk rating system for all the ESG related projects, so that the investors, they don't have any proper knowledge in terms of their benefit of the ESG investment. So lack of transparency and asymmetric information on portfolio development are also known as important issues within the banking sector, which can slow down the ESG investment. At the same time, a very clear and transparent ESG portfolio can also discourage a few of the potential investor, which may allow a small customer base for the bank. So that's why we are proposing that a customized portfolio development may be useful steps to promote the ESG investment in this region. So given this background, we aim to emphasize on 2 methods for the study. First of all, given the lack of literature, we'll carry out a holistic approach in terms of the nexus between the financial institution, ESG, and the economy. And after that, actually, we all know that there are some issues in terms of data, but we have realized that you can focus on a small panel regression. So we'll conduct a small panel empirical analysis to get an idea about the relation between financial institutions and ESG investment dynamics within the ASEAN region. So, and we believe that our findings are expected and have the potential to provide a strategic policy recommendations within the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saqib. This is interesting paper, role of banking and non-banking financial institution for filling the finance gap. So with this, let me wrap up the morning session. So we can discuss on the paper during the lunch. During the lunch, we can discuss. Thank you so much. And so we will have 1 hour break, and there is a change in our schedule. So we will come back 1:30. Okay, thank you so much. And